Hey, today we have a real treat. We have Dr. Tony Alexandra. Now, that name hopefully pops up in your mind because Tony has been around quite a while. He was one of my first influencers when I got into sales, back when everything was on cassette. You know, before podcasts, there were CDs. Before CDs, there were cassettes. And if you were in sales, you drove around, and if you were smart, you listened to cassettes all day long to keep you motivated to learn pretty much what you're doing today with podcasts. The difference was you didn't have the frequency and the volume that you have today. But Tony has been a lifelong learner and probably one of the most experienced people about profiling and persuasion and sales. And today we're going to be talking about mostly what he's doing for the last 20 years, which is profiling based around DISC. But I think the key here is that in sales, we naturally make the mistake of talking to everybody the way we like to be talked to versus the way they like to talk to. And you'll see this, especially when you sell to many different personas within your account: engineers, marketers, salespeople, leaders. They all are different. And we as salespeople need to be chameleons. And this is a big part of the outward mindset, is being able to connect with other people and talk the way they like to talk. Listen to the things that they want to say. Come up with insightful questions to get them speaking and sharing what they're up against. Now, I'm sure you've been in a meeting where you've been in a mismatch, or you've seen a mismatch where you get somebody who is very analytical and then somebody's very kinesthetic, very feeling oriented. Some people like to hear a presentation. Others just want to have a conversation. And too often what we think is the way the world is works for us. It might work 60, 70% of the time. But when it doesn't, we lose because we're not connecting with the other person. And you'll see this quite often when people travel. People go from, let's say, New York City to Atlanta. The words per minute is very different. This is why I have an issue with a lot of the AI stuff, is they're trying to assume that everybody listening is the same and that the mismatch between personalities isn't put into place. And we have to adapt to this. So we're going to discuss this in great detail. I want to thank our friends over at CoVideo for being so supportive of the podcast. Please go check out CoVideo. Make sure you're giving it a try. See if it works for you. Video, email, and just video in general is a skill that we all need. So they have great instructional material there on what makes a great video, as well as play with it for a while. See if it works for you. Also, if you're in the courses, make sure you're checking out the one-on-ones. We had a great office hours yesterday. Make sure you're checking that out because that's where the real value of the course is. You have to apply it. You have to see how other people are applying it. Find out the best match for you. And I'll sum up the progress at the end. Here we go with Tony.
In business, got an MBA at University of Connecticut, PhD at Georgia State University. By the way, Brian, my doctoral dissertation chairman at Georgia State University, and I was there from 1973 to 76, his name was Dr. David Schwartz. And Dr. David Schwartz was the author of the multi-million best-selling book, The Magic of Thinking Big.
Wow.
Which is one of the, I typically tell people that there were 3 books early in my life, my teens, that had an enormous impact on me pretty much to where I am today. One was The Magic of Thinking Big. The other one was Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. And the third, here's a crazy one, 30 Days to a More Powerful Vocabulary. And, I was very verbal growing up, very persuasive growing up, but my vocabulary, my reading wasn't as strong as my math. And that book really brought me up to another level. So those were the 3 biggies. But Dr. David Schwartz, because that book had such an impact on me early in life, having him as my dissertation chairman, and my major prof over at Georgia State was crucial. Well, after I got my PhD, I moved to San Diego, California, took a full-time teaching job at the University of San Diego. I was a prof there, taught sales and marketing strategy at the MBA level. After 3 years, decided, you know what, I'm going to strike out on my own and be a full-time professional speaker. I started that, actually started speaking part-time in November of '94 while I was still in my doctoral program. Did it while I was still at the University of San Diego. And in late '78, I had to make a decision. Do I really want to make full-time university teaching my lifelong job, or do I want to dip my toe into full-time professional speaking, which is really what I did. So in January of 1979, I struck out on my own. Was fortunate that that month my new book came out, my first book called Non-Manipulative Selling, my first 8 cassettes audio album called Non-Manipulative Selling, and I struck out on my own. And it was literally at that point, and I'm pretty sure it was at that point, where I was giving a speech for Century 21, you know, the big real estate company, was way big back in the late 70s. And one of the things they gave us was a booth where we can, you know, between our speeches, where we could sell our product. So I had my book, Non-Manipulative Selling, there. And the person who had a booth next to me was a guy named Jim Cathcart. Do you know that name?
It sounds real familiar.
Jim Cathcart, Hall of Fame speaker, probably got every award in speaking. You know, he was the Speaker of the Year for Toastmasters. He got the what we call the Cavett Award, which is really the Oscar of speaking from the National Speakers Association. But he had his booth next to mine, and he came over to my table, looked at my book, thumbed through it, and said, "Hey, you know, if I wrote a book, this would be it." And I said, "Well, why don't you just sell my book?" Long story short, we became partners in the speaking business. We're partners from that moment through 1985, when we kind of split and went our own ways, but still best friends today. We still keep in touch. But went out full-time speaking, averaged about 100 speeches a year. But in 2000, I really felt I needed to make a change. I was burning out on the travel. Right now, lifetime miles on American Airlines are 12.5 million miles. So you can imagine how much I travel. And it just was too much for me, Brian. I loved speaking, but I really didn't like all the other things that went around it, particularly the travel and the time away from family. So I decided to take this other business that I sort of had as an ancillary business, which was selling online assessments. And I decided to try to make that a full-time business. I took my entire speaking staff, spun them off into their own business called speakersoffice.com, which is a real going concern even today. I gave ownership to my key marketing person, Holly Catchpole. She owns the business. I don't own any of it right now. And I started building this assessment business. That was in 2000. Here we are, 20 plus years later, and my assessment business has grown to a significantly greater business financially than even my best year in speaking.
Wow.
And, you know, my best year in speaking, I was in the very, very low 7 figures, you know, doing 100 speeches a year at what, $15,000 to $20,000 a speech. But, and as the business grew, my assessment business grew, I cut back in speaking. Here we are today, where I never have to give another speech, never have to travel, love where I live, which is in San Diego. And I will give speeches here and there, mostly for my assessment clients. But once in a while, if it's a pretty unique speech, let's say in Dubai or Paris, you know, I would consider that and say, okay. So anyway, that's my background, Brian. Probably more than you wanted to hear.
No, that's good. Because like I described earlier, I've been following you for pretty much since the beginning, at least for me, because you were one of the first people I bought the cassettes for and wore them out in the car, or you leave them in the machine and the sun hits them and they explode.
Yep. Or they warp and you can't put them into the cassette player.
But how'd you get into assessments? Why did you have a passion for that?
Well, back in late 1974, when I had finished my doctoral coursework, but now I was getting ready for my doctoral dissertation. And my dissertation title was I know this sounds a little academic, but it was buyer-seller similarity as a determinant of success in selling. So the premise was, if the buyer felt that the seller was more like the buyer, would they be more prone to make a purchase? And so I was just looking at demographics, age, race, height, you name it, those gender. And then I went to a seminar in late 1974 where they were talking about the 4 behavioral styles. And I looked at this and I said, oh, wow. I mean, it really hit me because my minors all the way through college, my minors were in a form of social sciences, psychology, sociology, and the behavioral aspect of the 4 styles, which they were calling at the time the driver, expressive, amiable, analytical. I just said, this is what I want to do. I mean, it really hit me. It was like, kind of like love at first sight. So I went back to Dr. David Schwartz and I said, I want to change my dissertation. Instead of doing it on demographics, I want to do it on this, what we would call psychographics, the styles. He said, absolutely not. Stay with what you have. It's already been approved. Finish this, get out of here. And then if you really want to pursue the behavioral styles, do it once you got your PhD in hand and you're out of here, which was actually quite good advice. But that's what got me intrigued. I started doing much more research in it. I changed the titles early on, as you probably remember from my Relationship Strategies audio program, which was with Nightingale Conant, which over the years has sold well over 250,000 copies. I changed it to director, thinker, relator, socializer. And even beyond that, Brian, I have now focused more on the 4-style model called DISC, D-I-S-C, which stands for dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. And the reason I switched to that, away from my terminology, is probably twofold. In the late 80s, the people from, I think it was Carlson Learning at the time, which was originally Performax, the original company that had DISC, they asked me to write a book with their then VP of R&D, Dr. Michael O'Connor, and to write a book that blended the 2 models, my Platinum Rule model and their DISC model. So that was one reason that kind of got me into DISC, but also it is way, way more popular worldwide than the Platinum Rule was. So I went with the DISC, and that really is our big thing right now. We have a lot of different assessments. We do assessments for Ken Blanchard, Brian Tracy, Tony Robbins. I can go on and on. But DISC, Grant Cardone, DISC is the key. DISC is probably 80+% of all of our sales and revenue.
And why is it important for salespeople to be aware of this?
Well, let's go back to the original Platinum Rule. I mean, most people know the Golden Rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I believe in that rule 110% when it comes to values, ethics, honesty, consideration. There's no better rule than the platinum rule. But when it comes to one-to-one communication, in a world of increasing diversity, which we're in now, you need to understand that not everybody wants to be treated the same way as you do. Heck, I learned that firsthand when I moved from the East Coast, growing up in New York, New Jersey, and moving to San Diego. What worked in New York backfired in San Diego. So the platinum rule, which I created way back in the 70s, was do unto others as they would have you do unto them. In other words, treat people the way they want and need to be treated. So, that really is the key concept of what I preach.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that I found in the very best salespeople. I call it like the outward mindset, being able to have empathy, interest, curiosity, and awareness of the other person. Instead of you assuming they are like you. They're a New Yorker, exactly. They're a San Diegoer. And I felt the same thing, because when I first got into sales, I had a huge territory. And you fly into Atlanta one day, very different than flying into Dallas the next day, very different than going to DC the third day. And there's not just geographic difference, how many words per minute they speak. You're selling to an engineer, and then a first line manager, and then an owner, all have very different concerns.
Very, very different. You name it. The key is adaptability, which is what you're talking about. Adaptability is your ability to change your approach or your strategy depending on the situation or the person you're dealing with. No different than that age-old saying, Brian, when in Rome, do as the Romans.
Right. Don't expect the Romans to change to you.
That's right. Exactly right. Exactly right.
What's the first stage? Is it analyzing yourself, getting an assessment on yourself to see what type of person you are?
Yeah, I would say that certainly is a starting point. What is your style? My style, when we go to the DISC model, I'm primarily a high D, high I. And when we talk about DISC, dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness, it is truly a rarity that somebody is only one. We are a combination of all four. Right. It's just what percentage of each are we? So I'm a very high percentage D, a little bit lower I, and then much lower S and C. Now, so knowing that, I know that I tend to talk naturally. I tend to talk more than I listen. I tend to be more impatient. And knowing that tells me that when I'm with somebody who is, let's say, an S or a C, who is slower paced, not as assertive possibly as I may be, I need to slow down. I need to listen more than I talk, and I need to be more patient. So it's a learning process.
Yeah. And how do people learn this? Is it just being aware and practice, or is there particular steps they should go through?
Well, I think it helps learning about this whole concept of DISC. Yeah. I don't think you need to go through that. I mean, that's not a mandatory thing. I believe that if you, let's look at what people can do without even going through this whole DISC process. And that is listen. All right. When I listen, when I talk, I only know what I know. But when I listen, I not only know what I know, I also know what you know. How can I possibly be a person who can solve a problem for, let's say, my children, or make a sale without first doing my information gathering by asking questions? How could you possibly solve a problem without discovering what the problem is? So more than anything else, Brian, listen more than you talk. And based on the answers you get, develop your subsequent questions based on the other person's answers. So that would be the first thing I would do. Now, if you really want to get into understanding personality and behavioral style, certainly I would go through either taking the online DISC assessment with our report. There's a lot of different companies that have DISC assessments. We are not the only one. We're not even the biggest. But most of them, when you take the DISC assessment, they give you your analysis. So it's very descriptive of you. What we do with our reports, it's almost 50-50 descriptive of you based on how you answer the questionnaire. But the second half of it is prescriptive. In other words, it's a learning process of how do you now use this with each of the 4 styles. How do you identify somebody's style? How do you adapt? How do you teach, train, sell, service, lead, each of the 4 styles, knowing this concept. You could even go through, today, Brian, one of the significant changes in the market today is the whole concept of virtual. We're much more virtual. Virtual communication, virtual learning, virtual sales and service. Everything is moving more toward virtual, just like we're doing right now. Instead of you and I sitting in your office in a studio doing this interview, we're doing it right now, and it looks like we're right next to each other. So in this whole realm of virtual education, to me, is truly significant. The more you learn, the more you earn. And with DISC, for instance, I have a really, really good interactive virtual program on DISC. And if anybody's interested in really digging in and learning not only the concept, what the 4 styles are like, what their strengths and struggles are, what their fears and goals may be, but also how do you identify each of the 4 styles without having them take an assessment. And then once you know their style, how do you adapt, whether it's in a sales, a service, a leadership, a social, a family situation. So it kind of goes through this whole thing. It's a virtual learning program on DISC.
Have you found a particular personality type to be more successful in sales than others?
Not really. It truly depends. No, seriously.
I believe you, yeah.
A lot of people believe that the I style, the influence style, is the best salesperson. And I would say it's like taking somebody who is naturally good at sports, and they will, if there's no training at all, they will excel more than other people who are not naturally good. However, give me somebody who is naturally good. Let's take a sport. Let's take baseball. Naturally good at baseball, but they do no additional improvement. Then you give me somebody who is not nearly as good naturally, but put them through all kinds of coaching and training, and I will tell you they will likely do better than the person who is naturally good. Now, imagine taking somebody who is naturally good and go through all kinds of coaching and training. A good example, you may not even know this person. He's actually not only retired, but passed away. Being in San Diego, his name was Tony Gwynn, one of the great baseball players of all time, 8 batting titles in his career. This is a guy who was a naturally gifted baseball player who every at-bat he had videotaped, he studied every pitcher, their pitchers, their tells. He was the first at batting practice, the last to leave. You give me somebody that has a natural talent and puts that much time into additional learning, they're going to be incredible. Now let's go to sales. Give me somebody who is not naturally gifted in sales and put them through training, they will excel. But somebody who is naturally good at selling and put them through training, they will be a superstar. Yeah. So just one more thing about, selling, is there one style that's naturally good at selling? A lot also depends on who they're selling to.
Exactly.
Give me a high I selling to an engineer with no adaptability, they're going to fail.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it really depends. What are they selling? Who are they selling to? What is the length of the sale? There's some sales that are one call. There's some sales that are lengthy, multi-call sales. There's a lot of variables that go into it. Is it an inexpensive product, an expensive product, a simple product, a complex product? So is there one style that's naturally good at sales? No, it depends.
Well, what's the first thing you look for to read a person when you first meet them?
Yeah, I look for two things. Well, first of all, I like to ask open-ended questions. Tell me a little bit about your business. What are the three key things that are affecting your business or your customers today? Something like that, rather than a simple one sentence or one word question like, is your business good today? That's a yes or a no.
How's business? Yeah.
Yeah. I just want a broad, open-ended question so that I get them talking. So now I can listen. I not only listen to needs, because needs tell me what to sell, but I also listen for their style, because that tells me how to sell. And what I listen for are two things. I listen for whether they're more open or guarded. That's number one, or more task or relationship oriented. That's the same thing. Or whether they're more direct or indirect, which is more faster paced or slower paced. Those are the two decisions. So is the person more task oriented or relationship oriented? Is the person more direct or indirect, or faster or slower paced? And when I can make those two decisions, just listening to this person, it will tell me, hey, if the person is task oriented or fact oriented and fast paced, they're a D. If the person is more relationship oriented, more open in their communication and faster paced, they're an I. If they're slower paced but more relationship oriented, they're an S. If they're slower paced but more task or guarded, they're a C. That tells me their style. Those two either or decisions. Is the person more task or relationship oriented? Is the person faster or slower paced? Boom.
I think that's really important to read, because I learned very early in my sales career, is this person a talker or a listener? Because the introverts don't want a bunch of questions. They want to hear you tell a story or present. The talkers don't want to hear your story or presentation. They want to tell you exactly what's wrong and if you can help them.
That's exactly right.
And if you misread it, you're not on the same page. And I always loved the people who wanted to talk, because I like to listen, I like to ask questions, and I don't like to present. Because you never know when you're presenting if it's connecting or not.
That's exactly right. And that's why it's so important to do your needs analysis. Here's a quote that was I believe in my first book back in the late 70s. Prescription before diagnosis is malpractice. Any salesperson, right? Any salesperson who attempts to sell a customer without fully understanding the customer's needs from the customer's point of view is engaging in sales malpractice.
Right, because when you go to the doctor, what do you want? You want a pill. Okay. If there isn't a pill that'll cure it, you want maybe a shot. The last thing you want is an operation, right?
Right.
But you might need an operation.
Yeah. Nor do you want to walk into a doctor's office and the doctor looks at you and says, okay, I think you need to go into surgery, or, you need whatever. You want them to do a diagnosis before prescribing some sort of solution.
Yeah, because I think you have to start at symptom, right? Because the symptom might be just minor at this, because they're thinking, oh, my knee hurts. And they go, how does it hurt? Does it hurt first thing in the morning, and then once you warm up, you're okay? Or does it hurt all the time?
Yeah.
Really take that symptom and build it up. Do you need a knee replacement, or do you just need to stretch more? There's a big difference, because nobody wants to replace their knee until they really have to replace their knee.
Yeah.
And they'll do anything to avoid it. Because that's, I'm sure you've heard, like my dad, put off heart surgery until it was almost too late, right? And the doctor says he broke his ankle. He was in the hospital. He goes, "You're not going home. We're going down the hall."
Yeah.
And I think that's the way people are sometimes. But otherwise, you have to turn that symptom into the problem, talk about the alternatives and the implications of the alternatives. I don't think you get people to move very fast.
Yeah. And by the way, there's when I talk about the sales process, I say there really are two things you want to discover from a customer. And this isn't, it could be either or both, either or both. Problems that they're experiencing that you can help them solve, or opportunities that they have not taken advantage of that you can help them seize. So problems to solve, opportunities to seize. So one or the other, or even both.
Both.
So that's crucial.
Right, because I'm sure people come to you and they want to become better, but they really don't want to talk about what they're not doing right. And because it's very unusual that somebody has this outward mindset, because it takes a long time to develop it. It's usually triggered by parenthood or, becoming a manager, something where you can't be in your own head all the time. You have to be thinking like other people. You have to be reading that kid's cry. Is that hunger? Is it loneliness? Is it pain? What is it?
Yeah.
And you care so much that you have to do something about it. You just can't ignore it.
Well, that's why there's such a proliferation today of professional coaches. There's business coaches, there's personal coaches, family coaches. A lot of coaches today, tens upon tens of thousands of them. In fact, our biggest market for assessments are coaches that can use the assessments with their clients, their business clients, their one-on-one personal clients, whatever.
Right, because how often does somebody, even a friend, know exactly what change you could make in your personality or life that would have a dramatic impact that we don't even want to see, or we don't think it's that important?
That's right.
That one thing that you mentioned about listening, have some kind of hack that count to 3, 10, whatever it is, put the mute button on so that even if you do talk, they don't hear you.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. One of the things that I do, and I've told my kids to do this, is when it comes to email and or even a text with the kids, if you get something that strikes you the wrong way, responding immediately is not the right thing to do. So what I tend to do with emails, let's say, is if I have an issue or whatever, I write the email immediately and I put it in my drafts folder and then wait until the next day. And then I look at it after I've slept on this and I say, nah, that's too harsh. Let me, soften it. And it's a really good technique. That whole concept of, hey, count to 10 before you respond. Or before you respond, here's a good one. Take a slow, long, deep breath inwards like this. And if you take a breath inwards, you cannot talk. Try to do it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
You cannot talk. So it's a way to just pause. Hit the pause button. Look before you leap. That was something that I had to learn early in life. Look before you leap. My being a high D style, a dominant style, a type A personality, my motto was ready, fire, aim. Think about that. Yeah. Instead of ready, aim, fire. And it backfired often. I took more risks than I should have. I made decisions before I should have. So I had to learn to do that ready, aim, fire. However, there are people out there that are aim, and never make a decision.
Never fire.
Or fire, where they don't even think about it.
Right. So, because I think your second question about what are the top 3 things you're facing, if the other person doesn't respond fast, you might start firing out options. But that pregnant pause, that creates pressure and time to think and respond.
Exactly. And Brian, one of the best places to use this is with your children. And when your children have a problem, when they have an issue, a lot of parents like me want to jump right in and solve the problem for them. And what that does is it creates a dependency even later in life, where whenever they have a problem, they come to you to solve it. What you need to do is draw them out, let them talk about it, ask them what options there are, let them try to come up with solutions, asking questions to direct people to their own solutions. When you give a solution to somebody, they can either say yes or no. But when they come up with it, there's a bigger buy-in to implement something that they themselves created.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite questions. What do you see as your alternatives? Because what you'll get back is the algorithm that they're going through in their head. Well, I could do nothing. I could wait a month, or I could do the lowest option. Why do you like any of those? Which one do you like right now? Or just get them thinking through it.
Exactly. No, that's really good.
And we may not want to hear the answer. That might be part of the problem, but we need to hear the answer.
Yeah. I have one of my children is a high D. And whenever, when that child was young, whenever I would say, hey, we're going out to this restaurant tonight, they would complain. And I learned that I would give options. Tonight, we can go out to these 3 restaurants. Of course, all of them okay with me. Yeah. Which would you prefer? And no matter what they picked, I was happy because, these are all, 3 that I chose, but the child was happy because they made a decision. And now they were glad to go out to that restaurant that they chose, which was one of the options I gave them. A couple of other things that I think are important, Brian, and not just with children, but just in life and in business, is that, no matter what's going on in the world, no matter what we're facing, no matter what problems happen today, I live by this age-old statement that I know you're so familiar with, and many of your listeners are familiar with, and that is, this too shall pass. No matter what's going on, eventually it's going to pass. Things are going to get better. Even if they get a little worse, eventually they're going to get better. I always keep saying to myself, this too shall pass. So, with the COVID and coronavirus issue, as bad as it may seem, this too shall pass. Well, they can either go to Alessandra.com, which is my personal website, ALESSANDRA.com. Or if they want to learn more about assessments, they can go to Assessments, that's ASSESSMENTS 24x7.com. It's like Assessments 24x7.com.
What I always find shocking on LinkedIn is when I see the sales expert saying, do this, don't do that. And, things like, being liked doesn't matter. Building rapport doesn't matter. Just get to the point. Well, that's that's them. And that works for them, and that's fine. But that's not everyone. Some people like rapport. Until you have rapport, they don't believe a word you say. And you think that everyone just wants the facts. But until there's a problem to solve, do the facts really matter? They're informative, they're an element, but they're not enough. And let me also ask you a question. How many cold meetings did you get this week? Not inbound leads, not existing customers, not referrals, but cold outbound. How many conversations did you have? Everyone gives me the same answer. Oh, it depends. I go, how much this week though? It doesn't depend that much this week. And they go, anywhere from none to 1. That's the most common answer. And people in the course are getting 10, 20 of these conversations started per week, spending 4 hours, maybe 8 hours a week. How can they do it? The smart way. It's not about pitching. It's not about your value proposition or your elevator pitch. And more than anything, it's not about you. Now, people, you look at the course and they go, well, is it technology? Technology is a tiny little bit of it. Technology helps you do it, helps you scale it, helps you do it faster, but it doesn't replace that human touch and time. So in the course, what I share with you is what I've been doing for pretty much 10 years to get conversations started on social, on email, and on the phone. And I systematized it about 8 years ago, and it's been growing ever since. It's been online for about 2.5 years now, and it has probably 10x'd in value since I first started. Why? Because the only people who join the course are the hardest of the hard. No one's going to join the course if they've got leads. Why? The people who join the course are like, they don't have any leads. They tried cold calling, didn't work. Tried dodumbthingsfaster.com, and it didn't work. That doing more dumb things might get you a little bit better, but it exhausts you. It burns out your territory. Start the conversation and get the meeting is the game changer for salespeople. If you can start cold conversations with complete strangers, what is there to stop you? Of course, the next course is closing the complex sale. And guess what I heard a lot of? 3 things happen in the large complex sale, 80% of the time. One of these 3 things. 1, do nothing. 2, start over because you all of a sudden met yet another person whose approval you need, and you got to start the sales process, not completely over, but over with them. And number 3, do as little as possible. It goes from an enterprise deal to a single, tiny little deal that should have been done on a corporate credit card, not over a 3-month difficult, highly competitive sales process. I saw all these things. I continue to see them as a manager. I see them in other reps, and I hated it because you put in that 3 months, 6 months of work, and you got little to nothing out of it. You might have been better off not doing it. But the people who get the enterprise deal done anticipate these things and prevent them. They know that this is the natural outcome of a large complex sale. We are all taught how to compete against our competitors, but we lose more to one of those 3 things. Do nothing, start over, or do something small. Now, that's not why we got into this, is to spend 3 to 6 months on a tiny deal. Closing the complex sale is the only thing out there that teaches this, how companies buy and how to prevent these from happening. And everyone on the 15-minute calls with me says, well, how does it compare against this or that? And it's like, it's night and day. I took all those courses when I got into sales. Yes, they're helpful. They are. There's nothing bad about them. But it doesn't teach you how companies buy and how to keep momentum, direction, and control over a deal. It doesn't tell you what artifacts each person needs to see to approve this. And the natural event is for the deal to get stuck because everyone gets scared when they have to spend money. It's all play up until spending money happens. Because once money is spent, careers get put on the line. That's when it starts to count. And we don't get paid until they spend money. We're working at risk. Yeah, sure, we got a base salary maybe, but the rest of it's totally at risk. And it all sounds so good until they have to take action. They get scared. They want to cover their butt. They become apprehensive. And if you don't do the things that need to be done, you're going to get stalled. That's the natural effect. And people say, well, just have more pipeline. Yeah, pipeline's great, but good pipeline of real deals of people who have gone through that process. But you're going to go through the same process with them. And the natural event, you'll probably be doing the tiny minimum single seat deals just to get it across. And there's nothing really wrong with that. It's just, is that worth the ROI of your investment? You're in sales. Get serious about it. You can waste 5 years sitting around with your platitudes. Oh, it's all about relationships. It's all about your network and your net worth. They're all true. They're just incomplete. You're counting on somebody else to do your job within the account, and they have 0 sales experience. They assume it's easy. They assume that they're going to go on their word. And they might. 20% of the time they do. 80% of the time they don't. So which one is it going to be? You can look at, 1 out of 5 of your deals is going to close. Now, what if you could get that up to 4 out of 5? Nobody's perfect. And not everyone's going to buy. But when you know where you are and where you need to go, you can become better. And how about if you could hear other people talk through their deals and see what are the classic traps? They're not traps because of inexperience. They're traps because of both knowledge. You're blinded by your own needs. You hear what you want to hear. You're not anticipating it stalling. And you overlook things that after it happens, you're like, I knew I should have done that. Everyone says that. That's one of the laws. If you knew it was going to happen, why didn't you prevent it? You didn't prevent it because you didn't believe it was going to happen, or you were hoping that it wouldn't. Or you just didn't care enough. You didn't look for it. You didn't see it, but now you see it once it happened. Go to b2brevenue.com to check out the courses. They're game-changing. Schedule a 15-minute call with me, but be serious. If you can't afford it, don't do it. If you're lazy, don't do it. If you think you know it all, don't do it. You won't be happy. If you want to bring your game to the next level, invest a little bit of money in you, a little bit of time, hour, 2 hours a week of really applying sales. Show up for office hours or at least listen to them. Schedule one-on-ones or at least listen to other people's. What other course gives you that? It doesn't. Everything's done with me. I don't have a flunky here, answering the questions for you. It's me. And what do I care about? Your success. That's it. How much do you care about your success? A lot of people just email me with questions, and I say, are you in my course? And they reply, LOL. It's like, well, if you're not willing to invest in you, why should I? I'll answer some questions on the Sales Questions Brutally Honest podcast, and they're tactical. I've got hundreds, maybe thousands of videos on YouTube, Brian Burns Sales on YouTube, but that they're not curated and correlated and complete. They're just tips and tricks. And anecdotes, little stories, and they're helpful. But sales, there are tactics, and you have to be good at the tactics, but strategy eats tactics for breakfast. And if you're going to rely on just tactics, your strategy is going to fall apart because you're not thinking ahead. You're reacting. You're not proacting. So go check out the other podcasts. Check out my videos on both YouTube and LinkedIn. Follow the company page on LinkedIn. I appreciate that. Give the content a little thumbs up, a little like, a comment, a share. Appreciate that. We'll see you next time.